Mm.
Right. So I thought it might be interesting to start, Barry, just to hear a lot more about the early part of your life that most people don't know about. Where did you grow up, or where were you born, and how, perhaps through those early years, did you come to music?
Well, I was born in Prahran in Melbourne, and we lived in Brighton for a couple of years and then moved to South Yarra, which sounds very grand, but then the street we lived in was not grand. It's now gentrified, shall we put it that way. My father was an organist, and well, basically he was a keyboard player, but to earn a living he learnt to play the organ, and to earn a living playing the organ he played the mighty Wurlitzer in the movie houses, because he didn't make any money playing in churches. And so I grew up with basically that sort of music in my life, although we did have a few records. I remember we had Bach's Toccata and Fugue, played by Leopold Stokowski in the Philadelphia Orchestra. So I've known that recording all my life. We also had volumes of piano duets, which we used to play at home, Beethoven symphonies number 1 to 5. And I thought, well, Beethoven wrote 5 symphonies, and when I started playing the horn, I found that there were 4 more. I was quite excited. That was just the first volume. Anyway, I tried to play keyboard because there was a piano in the house, and I remember trying to play the violin because my sister played the violin, but I really that wasn't my cup of tea at all. And it wasn't until I started to play the horn that I found there was an outlet for me musically. And I think, but for that coincidental conversation my sister had when she was playing in the Sydney Symphony Orchestra as a violinist, with the principal oboe player, who's now Sir Charles Mackerras, and the second horn, who was Richard Merriweather, who did so much for Paxman horns. And the conversation went, I understand, is what are we going to do about Barry, who was aged 13 and getting into all sorts of trouble. He's musical, he must be able to play something. And it was probably Richard who said, well, would he like to try to play the horn? And that's how it happened.
How did it continue on from there with, I believe, a couple of early teachers, and then into a very famous Australian musician who's become quite a legend here with his horn teaching, with the amount of players that have been past Alan Mann and learned from his amazing experience?
Well, Richard gave me my first half a dozen lessons and then passed me on to, I think it was Harold Wolff. And then Alfred Hooper, and then Alan Mann came out of, he'd been in the army, and he came back to the con, and that's when I started to learn from Alan, a very important person in my life. Excuse me. Very important person in my life, not only musically, but in general, because he would say, well, he'd ask me how I was doing at school, because I was still at school. And for example, I'd say, well, I was having trouble with geography or something, so he'd say, oh, forget about the horn. He'd give me a geography lesson. He'd give me a lesson on whatever I was having a problem with at school. He was a much better teacher than the people at school. And but he was also quietly teaching the horn and pretending he didn't know anything, saying, oh, we don't have a school out here, we've got to find out how to do it ourselves. But he instilled in every student that I've spoken to, he instilled in us the ability to think for ourselves. I don't believe he taught in a standard way. It was specifically for who he was teaching. But underlying it all, he was making us think and work at it. And indeed, that proved to be a very important thing in my life, because when I became the first horn in the London Symphony Orchestra, I was pretty much in the deep end. This is what I was wanting to do, is play in a major orchestra in a big city like London. And I began having little problems, because I'd been playing by instinct, strength, which you can do in your 20s, you just go at it. And thought, I've got to do something about this, because I wasn't happy, and if the playing wasn't up to standard, obviously I wouldn't be first horn for very much longer. And in the space of, less than 2 weeks, I remember I thought, I've got to sort this out. I won't go into specifics how I did it, but I basically tried to teach myself and analyse my own playing. And it was all due to Alan. And I remember that occasion when I received my honorary doctorate of music in the University of Sydney. I invited him to come to the ceremony, and before my prepared speech, I remember thinking, sitting up on the stage, I've got to do something, I've got to pay some tribute to Alan, and I did. For me it was quite extraordinary, because I don't make off-the-cuff speeches, but I did make a speech and more or less said, look, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that man down there, and got him to stand up, and everybody clapped, and I felt really quite pleased to have done something for him. You know, probably the only thing I could do to pay him back, because underneath his dour exterior, he could be, he was always telling me what to do. You should be doing this. You know, he's a very bossy man. Was actually a very kind and gentle man. I remember asking my sister about him, because she played in the orchestra in the violin section. And this was after Alan had died, and I was asked to write an obituary for the orchestra. And so I was doing some research, and she said, we were all terrified of him. Because if you look at pictures of him, he had this big dome of a head. He was just bursting with sort of brain power. Very, very clever man. So that was Alan, who of course started life as a bass trombone player. Very important figure in the brass world.
So it was, as I understand it, a fairly meteoric rise from those first couple of years of playing the horn, and was it right that you ended up in the Melbourne Symphony after just 2 years of playing the horn?
I think you've got to bear in mind that I could read music. That wasn't a problem. And if you played the keyboard, you've got a lot of notes to read, and I thought the horn was easy from that point of view, reading the music, because it was one note at a time and they were slower. And obviously I had some ability to make a sound on the instrument. So I did. I remember I was playing gigs within a few months, because Alan was always pushing me. I presume he did it to everybody. Pushed me out to take any gig I could. He said, doesn't matter how good or bad it is, do it, because that's the only way you're going to learn to play with other people and play ensembles. And indeed he was right. So I was doing gigs all over the place. And I don't know how it happened, but Joseph Post, who was the conductor here in Melbourne, had an opening for third horn, and I auditioned for it. But he knew me, because I must have been playing extra with the Sydney Orchestra by then. I was. And no, I'd been down to Melbourne, played second horn, just a gig, and I remember it was Tintagel by Arnold Bax, and I was thrilled because there's a second horn solo in it. And I thought, gee, this is fun, you know, only a couple of bars. So Joseph Post knew me, and so he gave me the job as third horn. I presume that he thought I was the best around, but so that I was 15.
Wow. Must have been fascinating even then in that time, and then going back to Sydney with all the different musical stories as a 15-year-old actually playing in these orchestras. Must have been quite remarkable at the time.
Yeah, I was probably 16 or 17 when I went to Sydney. I was pretty grown up.
Experience.
Do you want to leave it there?
Yeah, that's a good spot to stop.